There are questions that slip into the mind when the noise of daily life finally fades away. Questions that no wealth, no distraction, no passing pleasure can silence. Among them stands one that has haunted humanity for centuries. Is life, at its core, nothing but suffering? Arthur Schopenhauer, the German philosopher whose piercing eyes seemed to look directly into the abyss, answered with terrifying certainty. For him, suffering was not an accident. Not a temporary cloud in an otherwise bright sky. It was the very essence of existence. To live, he argued, is to suffer. Not sometimes. Not occasionally. Always. At first, such a thought feels unbearable. How can one live with this conclusion? Doesn't it extinguish all hope, all joy, all purpose? And yet, Schopenhauer was not simply a destroyer of illusions. He was also a guide, someone who sought to help us see clearly, without the comforting veils we so often hide behind. His philosophy, sharp as glass, cuts deep, but it does not cut aimlessly. He began with a simple observation: the restless nature of desire. From the moment we open our eyes, we are creatures of need. Hunger presses upon us. Then boredom. Then ambition. Then longing for love, recognition, or power. One desire is satisfied only to give birth to another, like waves rolling endlessly on a shore. This chain of wanting never ends, and in its persistence lies the root of our suffering. Imagine, he would say, the brief spark of satisfaction you feel when you finally achieve something you longed for. It fades almost instantly. A student works endlessly to graduate, only to ask, now what? A worker spends years climbing the ladder, only to feel the hollowness of success at the top. Even the lover, burning with passion, soon finds that possession extinguishes the very fire that once consumed them. In every victory hides a new hunger. In every satisfaction, the seed of discontent. This, Schopenhauer argued, is the iron law of life: to will is to suffer. And since life itself is the endless striving of the will, existence cannot be separated from pain. The universe, in his vision, is not guided by reason, not ordered toward harmony or justice, but driven blindly by a will that uses us as its instruments. We are pulled forward, like marionettes, by desires we did not choose, toward goals that vanish as soon as we touch them. And so the cycle continues, striving, reaching, failing, grasping again. A pendulum swinging endlessly between pain and boredom. When we want something desperately, we suffer the pain of absence. When we obtain it, we suffer the emptiness of fulfillment. When nothing presses on us at all, we suffer from the unbearable weight of boredom. There is no escape from the pendulum's cruel rhythm. To some, this conclusion sounds like despair itself. A philosophy fit only for shadows and graveyards. But to dismiss it so quickly is to miss its depth. For Schopenhauer's point was not merely to declare life dark, but to force us to look directly at the reality we so often avoid. Only then, he believed, can we learn to live honestly. Only then can we discover the strange forms of relief hidden within the darkness. But before we can reach those hidden forms, before we can glimpse even a flicker of light, we must dwell for a moment in the storm itself. Because it is only by walking through the depth of Schopenhauer's reasoning that his rare and fragile solutions begin to shine with meaning. He never promised escape. He never promised paradise. What he offered was something more demanding, a way to face suffering without illusion, and in that clarity, perhaps, to find a different kind of strength. And so, if life is suffering, what remains for us to do? That question haunted Schopenhauer. And it is where his philosophy begins to unfold like a dark map, guiding us through landscapes most thinkers would rather ignore. Let us follow him, step by step, as he exposes the truth most would prefer to forget. To understand why Schopenhauer's philosophy struck so deeply, we must go further into the structure of suffering he described. He did not believe pain was an exception to life. He believed it was life's rule. Think of the countless small frustrations that mark an ordinary day. The train you miss by a minute. The ache in your back that won't fade. The disappointment in a friend's voice. Each moment seems minor, but together they weave a fabric of discontent that no amount of pleasure can fully cover. Schopenhauer insisted that this was not an accident of culture, not something unique to one person or one society. It was the universal rhythm of existence itself. He compared life to a business transaction that never balances. We pay constantly with our energy, our health, our years, and what do we receive? Fleeting joys, brief respites, the illusion of stability. But always the account falls back into deficit. At the heart of this imbalance lies the will, the blind, restless force that compels every living thing. It is not rational. It does not know peace. It only demands, and demands again. A flower strains toward the light. An animal hunts even when full. A human being chases wealth, love, status, or knowledge, never content, never free. This, he argued, is why happiness feels so fragile. We think of it as something solid, something we can achieve and hold. But happiness is only the brief pause between two sufferings. And yet, it is precisely here, in this unflinching honesty, that Schopenhauer offers something rare. Because by naming suffering as the core of life, he prevents us from building fragile castles on false hopes. He forces us to ask, if suffering is inevitable, how then shall we live? Some philosophers promised heaven. Others promised utopias of reason or progress. Schopenhauer promised neither. Instead, he looked to the arts, to compassion, and to the possibility of quieting the will itself. These were not easy escapes, nor permanent solutions. But they were windows, brief, luminous openings in the walls of pain. The first of these windows was art. When we are absorbed in a painting, a symphony, a poem, we step outside the restless cycle of desire. For a moment, we no longer want, no longer strive. We simply contemplate. And in that contemplation, suffering loosens its grip. Music, above all, held a sacred place for him. He called it a direct copy of the will itself, a language that bypassed words and ideas to speak directly to the essence of life. But unlike desire, music did not chain us to suffering. It gave form to our pain, transforming it into something we could bear, something even beautiful. Think of the moment when a melody carries you beyond your own thoughts. The sorrow in a violin. The thunder in a symphony. In music, Schopenhauer believed, we find the closest thing to freedom, not escape from life, but a pause from its endless hunger. The second window was compassion. Though he often painted a bleak picture of existence, he insisted that recognizing the suffering of others could awaken in us a different kind of strength. By seeing ourselves in the pain of another, we step outside the prison of ego. For a moment, the will that drives us inward is turned outward, softened, shared. Compassion does not erase suffering, but it transforms it. It binds human beings together in a silent recognition, I, too, suffer. And so I understand you. And finally, Schopenhauer spoke of quieting the will itself. Not destroying it, for that was impossible, but reducing its grip. Through ascetic practices, through deep reflection, through the acceptance of limits, one might loosen the chains of desire. Not to eliminate pain completely, but to lessen its power over the soul. These ideas were not easy comforts. They did not promise joy without price. But they revealed to Schopenhauer's followers that even in a world built on suffering, there were ways to find stillness, beauty, and dignity. He had shown us the storm. And now he pointed, not to sunlight breaking through, but to small flames flickering in the darkness, fragile, yet real. And so the question remained. If life is indeed suffering, can these fragile windows, art, compassion, silence, be enough to make existence bearable? Schopenhauer believed they could. But to see why, we must turn more closely to the one he cherished above all, music, the strange and invisible bridge between pain and peace. Music, for Schopenhauer, was not mere entertainment. It was not background noise to distract us from our troubles. It was the very heartbeat of existence. Other arts, he said, reflected the forms of the world, the shapes, the colors, the patterns. But music spoke the language of the will itself. It was a direct translation of life's deepest reality, and in that translation, something miraculous occurred. Pain became melody. Longing became harmony. Even despair could be carried on a wave of sound until it touched beauty. In this way, music gave us a strange kind of redemption. Not by erasing suffering, but by transforming it into something meaningful. To listen deeply was to step outside the restless striving of desire and experience a rare kind of stillness, even if only for a moment. And Schopenhauer believed these moments mattered. They were not illusions. They were not lies. They were glimpses of freedom. He extended this hope beyond music, too. Whenever we acted with compassion, whenever we recognized another's pain as our own, we weakened the walls of isolation that suffering builds around us. We became, if only briefly, more than prisoners of the will. For him, compassion was the highest moral truth. Not commandments, not laws, not ideals. But the simple act of recognizing, you suffer, and so do I. We are the same. And so, even in a world built on suffering, love, quiet, imperfect, human love, remained possible. It was perhaps the most surprising gift of his philosophy. Because in his darkest conclusions, he uncovered a reason to care for one another more deeply than ever. Yet Schopenhauer went even further. He suggested that true peace might be found by loosening the grip of the will itself. Through self-discipline, through reflection, through letting go of the endless chase for satisfaction, we might find a quieter life. Not free of pain, but free from its tyranny. Picture a person who no longer needs to run from silence. Who no longer fears boredom because they no longer expect life to entertain them at every moment. Such a person, he believed, lives closer to freedom than the one who constantly chases desires that vanish in their hands. This vision was not easy. It demanded honesty. It demanded sacrifice. It demanded that we stop pretending life was meant to deliver constant joy. But in that very demand lay its power. Because once we accept that suffering is the rule, we stop being surprised by it. We stop feeling betrayed by existence. We learn, instead, to face it with clarity and with strength. So, why did Schopenhauer believe life is just suffering? Because he saw the restless hunger of the will, the endless chain of desires, and the fragile nature of joy. He refused to look away. And in refusing, he offered us not despair, but honesty. And with honesty, a new kind of hope arises. The hope not of escaping pain, but of living truthfully in spite of it. The hope of finding beauty in music, kindness and compassion, and peace and acceptance. Perhaps this is why, even today, his words resonate so strongly. Because deep down, we know that life is not a paradise of endless happiness. It is fragile, unpredictable, and filled with loss. But we also know this, within that fragility lies the chance to grow wise, to love deeply, to create meaning where none is given. Schopenhauer's philosophy does not hand us easy answers. It does not promise a golden tomorrow. Instead, it invites us to walk through the storm with open eyes, and to find, in the midst of suffering, small but real sources of light. And maybe, just maybe, that is enough.